our social media and YouTube pages. So please stop by if you missed any of it, or encourage other people to check it out. So besides this event today, I wanted to mention a few upcoming events. So on August 5th, you probably saw that we have a legacy lecture from a historian, I believe her name is Leslie Heapy, from Kent State University about women in sports. So we're super excited about that coming up. We also have a virtual, all of these events are virtual, so feel free to join us wherever you are in the world. August 13th, we have a virtual First Ladies Night. First Ladies is kind of First Ladies inspired craft activities. So this past month we did Martha Washington inspired cross stitch. We have a really cool one coming up that's kind of inspired by our exhibitions here at First Ladies. So we are doing string art with a local business person, Shauna, who is going to lead us through a very patriotic inspired string art, thinking about all of the buttons and pins and memorabilia we have on view at First Ladies right now. So we're really excited about that. And August 27th at noon, you can join us for our book club, and we're reading the book Never Caught. It's about the woman who was enslaved by the Washingtons, Martha Washington's slave Ona Judge. So we're really looking forward to that. Erica Dunbar is the author. She's really amazing. She just wrote a book about Harriet Tubman that's really great too. So we're looking forward to all of those events. And if you're able to reach us in person, I just see someone checking in from London. So hello, thanks for joining us. We are open to the public currently, so you can stop by. We have 3 exhibitions on view. One about women in First Ladies on the campaign trail. The other is about the suffrage centennial, and it's very specific to women in Ohio who helped pass the 19th Amendment. And the third is about women who have run for president. And so they're all really cool. They're all really exciting. And the person who has helped to make them happen is with us today, Michelle Gullion, our very own archivist curator. So I am welcoming Michelle here today, and I'm going to turn things over to her. She's going to be talking about First Ladies and suffrage. So we spent a lot of time talking about suffrage, but how did First Ladies feel? What was their view? So I'm going to turn off my microphone and camera, but I am going to be here to help facilitate with any questions people may have. So if you're here on Zoom, you have a question, you have an issue, please let us know. There's a chat, and we'll put any relevant folks and info there. And then if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll be happy to help you. So I am going to turn things over to Michelle.
Good morning, everyone, or I guess good afternoon. I'm Michelle Gullion, as Allison so kindly introduced me, and I'm the curator and archivist here. I have had some really wonderful, fun research that I've done, and I've titled this First Ladies on the Thorny Road to Suffrage, because we get so many questions about what were First Ladies doing on while the suffrage movement was going on. And it's really been a difficult thing to really discuss, because they are political, married to political men and that type of thing. So we're going to go into a few things here really quickly to kind of overview before we start talking about the First Ladies. The traditional role of a First Lady, for those of you in the UK, here in the United States, is a symbol of American womanhood. Now I'm going to go into that just a little bit in just a little while. But that's a very symbolic type of role that they are serving. Also, they are the official hostess of the nation. That role could be kind of, in other countries, might be provided by a ceremonial role, like a head of state, while her husband serves more as the government legislative part. but here in the United States, she is officially the hostess of the nation. She's also extremely supportive of her husband and his presidency. It is his presidency, not hers. And she's very, every single First Lady is very, determined to make sure people understand that it is her husband's presidency. Her authority and influence comes through who she is married to. She's married to the president, so it's not like she has the influence. It doesn't come just from what she herself as an individual is doing. It's also a volunteer position. It's, and the First Lady, at least as of yet, it's still an unpaid position. Most of the time, and I think even up to current times, if a First Lady has a career, she often ceases doing her career so that she can pursue her own career while she's First Lady, so that she devotes full time to her volunteer position as a First Lady during the presidency term. So we're going to go into a little bit of what the symbol of American womanhood means. It changed at the beginning of the 1800s. Of course, women were considered to be purity and pious, the domestic world, very homebound. Marriage and motherhood were what you aspired to do. That was really what women were on this earth to be considered, were the most important things that they should do. It was also about being very submissive. It was also being, the only thing that really a woman really had that was over a man was her superiority in virtue, her morality. She had she was next to godliness, that type of thing. So this is not a model that was being done by a model for upper class elitist women. It was not something that the lower middle classes to lower income women this was not their reality, but this was, like I said, an ideal that was being done. It started to change the American womanhood. It started to stop being just being out in public. You were seen but not heard. You never spoke in public. It starts to change around the 1850s to the 1860s, especially after the Civil War. Because women are now, by necessity, becoming more and more part of the equation that's happening with the shortage of men because they're needed to be fighting for the troops. So women are even becoming more important as teachers and in the medical field as nurses. So these become more and more, you become more accustomed to having women being seen in these areas. Also, with the elevating the family status with proper behavior, that includes your consumerism, your materialism, the capitalism that's very important in this country, your sign of wealth, and also your behavior and how you dress is very important too. The activities that you do in your church with community, within the community and with women's clubs and charities, this becomes much more acceptable and a way for women to express themselves more publicly. But it's within the realm of, again, that purity, being closer to God and more superior to men. And this is also why women are able to feel that they can address the sins of society, such as alcoholism, slavery, and gambling. Of course, this is, again, just for more of an upper class type of idealism. Also, what's happening within the suffrage movement itself. Of course, we say that it begins in Seneca Falls in 1848, and it ends with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Of course, it really doesn't end for all American women at that point, but that's when the suffrage movement really comes to an end. The anti-suffrage movement, and I have to talk about that anti-suffrage movement in this talk because of our first ladies, is also begins in the 1871. So it gets a much later start in the movement, so to speak. And the anti-suffragists, when I was doing my research, I was looking at why would women not want other women to be a part of voting? Why weren't all women all on board for that? Well, it's not that simple. There's all these shades of gray. Anti-suffragists were opposed to women receiving the vote because they could lose their influence in the matters of morality and the public good that we just talked about with the American womanhood. And receiving the vote would make women more political. And they felt that that was not good. You were doing these things for moral reasons, not for political reasons. And then there was also this element of partial suffrage. And this was a belief that women should have the right to vote on things that were for the public good, especially when it came to education and children. So there were a lot of women who were for partial suffrage. I found this quote that I thought was put very nicely from Manuel Thorny in an article called Better Citizens Without the Ballot, which was really talking about this element of women who were actively against the women being able to vote. And it's the statement that I thought was very important to understand was, while the demand for the vote in some instances served as a unifying cause for many female activists who otherwise found themselves in general accord on matters concerning women's prominent role in the turn of the century social involvement, antis and suffragists differed on which way was better and more efficient to that end. Kind of interesting to think about. So now we're going to turn to some of the first ladies and how difficult this is and the shades of gray that come with being a first lady. Our first lady that we're going to talk about is Frances Folsom Cleveland. She came to the White House as a bride. She was 21 when she married President Grover Cleveland in the White House of the Blue Room. Grover was 48. So there was a 27-year difference between the two of them. Grover actually had known Frances all of her life. He was very good friends with Frances's father. When Frances' father passed away, he oversaw Frances' mother and her estate, took care of their financial means, and actually oversaw Frances's education at Wells College. So she knew him for all her life. When she came on the scene, oh my gosh, people loved her. She's gorgeous. What's not to love about these big, beautiful eyes? And she was quite the fashionista. So all these, she was just incredibly popular with men and women. In some respects, she was more popular than Grover Cleveland. And Grover Cleveland really didn't like this. He was very much a person who believed in that the women's place was in the home and she needed to be taking care of that. So he didn't really like this. One of the most important things that Frances did as a first lady was, as all first ladies did at the time, she gave 2 weekly receptions for women at the White House during the social season. But this was an incredibly progressive move for a first lady. She realized that there were women who were now working in the workplace. Things were changing and women were having more access and needing to work in the workplace. So she gave every Saturday, she would give a reception for working women. And they were called Working Women's Receptions, and they were quite popular, so that working women would have access to meeting the First Lady and meeting her, and also touring the White House. That was her first term. She actually has 2 unconsecutive terms. In between was Caroline Harrison and Benjamin Harrison was president. And I'm not going to talk about Caroline today. There's just not enough time, but she's a terrific first lady. Frances, she came back in 1893 to the White House as a mother. You see in this lovely lithographic print of Frances with her two daughters. She had Ruth already while in between the 4 years between the presidencies. And then when she entered the White House in 1893, she quickly gave birth to Esther shortly after that. And she would actually have another daughter before she left the White House in 1897. She is now a mother, and so that's where her focus is, as a true American womanhood would be. And she's a doting mother. She is very, very interested in what's happening in Germany. In Germany, they are starting to have kindergartens for children who are preparing for school. And she's very fascinated with this idea. So she has the very first kindergarten. She has it in the White House, and she has Ruth attend along with some of the cabinet members' children attend a kindergarten. So that's what her focus mainly was on education for her children. After she leaves the White House in 1897, she goes on to have 2 more children. She has 2 sons, and she's got 5 kids by this point. And then in 1908, Grover Cleveland passes away, and she's still a very young woman. So she remarries in 1913 to a man named Thomas Preston Jr. So by the time that really the suffrage movement is really in full force and going very strong, Frances Cleveland is actually now she's Mrs. Thomas Preston, if you look at the last paragraph there. She is a very active member of the Anti-Suffrage Party. In this article we have from the Indiana Gazette. This is April of 1918, and it's telling you in this amazing article that the New York State Association opposed to women's suffrage has met here to reorganize, and this is because they need to stop the federal federal regulations, Congress from passing women's right to vote for all the country. In this particular one here, we see that in May of 29th of 1919, Mrs. T.J. Preston is anti-suffrage officer. She was actually elected the first vice president. Now she's working for the New Jersey Association opposed to suffrage. She was incredibly, incredibly involved, very involved, actively involved in the anti-suffrage movement. Of course, you see the date there, May 29th, 1919. So she's there fighting for women not to have the right to vote. But June 4th of 1919, Congress passes the amendment to, and the 19th Amendment is granted to the right for women to vote. Our next First Lady we'll look at is Ida Saxton McKinley. She's our hometown First Lady here in Canton, Ohio. She was, by the time that she becomes First Lady in 1897, by this point, she's labeled an invalid. Ida suffered from epilepsy. She had had a very difficult second pregnancy, and when she gave birth to her second daughter, she promptly died not too much longer after that. But Ida was left with suffering from epilepsy for the rest of her life. Part of William McKinley's campaign was based on his devotion to his wife, and they really kind of played up how he was so devoted to Ida's care. This was because at this point, there's 5 states that can vote for, this is the first campaign in 1896 where women can vote. So they're trying to woo some of these female votes by playing up his devotion, which was very real to his wife. But Ida, before her epilepsy, she was a vibrant woman. She was extremely well educated. She excelled at mathematics. And believe it or not, she worked in her father's bank in the late 1860s. Now, this is unheard of for a Victorian woman to be working in her bank. It helped that Daddy owned the bank, but this is amazing that this very strong and vibrant woman was do this type of thing. And she was still that same woman, even though she had suffered from epilepsy. So was she for suffrage? Well, in this piece here from February 13th of 1900, we see this article is actually huge. It's about a conference that's happening for the for the women's suffrage movement, and Susan B. Anthony is in town. And this is a part about where she goes to the White House for a reception, and she meets the president, and she's also has an interview with Mrs. McKinley. If you read the very last paragraph here, it says, Miss Anthony opened the evening's exercises by presenting the ladies of the convention a great bouquet of lilies, which had been presented to her by Mrs. McKinley after the reception to the suffragists at the White House, and with the wish, and the wish was expressed that Miss Anthony would say to her girls that ill health prevented the personal greeting Mrs. McKinley would like to extend, but that she felt great interest in the cause of woman. An announcement received with a rising vote and thanks and much applause. And then Susan B. Anthony places the flowers for all to see. Very neat. We also have this very interesting piece here. Note the headline there. Mrs. McKinley dresses a doll for a bazaar. Okay, but if you read further, you read that she has finished a beautiful doll for the Ohio booth of the National Suffrage Bazaar to be held in Madison Square Garden on December 3rd. It goes into great detail now. You won't read anything more about this bazaar except telling you how wonderful and beautiful this dress is. And it goes into great detail about how Mrs. McKinley has really dressed this. She's picked out the outfit. It's this beautiful doll. A couple of days later, we actually have this photograph or this illustration of the doll. Again, note it's just White House dolls at New York Bazaar. You have to read down below that you see that, again, not only has Mrs. McKinley, but Mrs. Theodore Roosevelt, who is vice president at this point. His wife is donating these dolls to the National Suffrage Bazaar in New York City. So it's very interesting that we see these lovely dolls. Again, it just really kind of talks more about the beauty of the dolls than it does the fact that a first lady and a second lady of the United States have donated these dolls for a suffrage bazaar. So what about Edith Kermit Roosevelt? She is actually one of these women who is very difficult. She is so private, but she takes the things that you can really say about Edith is that she really takes she really takes the first ladyship to another more professional level. Oh my goodness, I've gotten off my notes completely here. She changed the office of the First Lady by employing the very first personal secretary for a First Lady. This was a paid position, and that's because there was so much mail that First Ladies always received. And they still do. But Edith wanted organization and wanted that to be properly taken care of. She also only allowed photographs of her very popular and photographic children to be taken. She would tell them to the press, I will allow you to take these photographs, but only these photographs. And if you don't if you take more or anything else, then I'll cease doing that. So they behaved themselves. We also know that Theodore Roosevelt came out as pro-suffrage himself in the 1912 presidential campaign when the Republican Party split and Theodore became the Bull Moose Party. He ran on the platform of giving women the right to vote. And we also know that Edith, she made a doll for the National Suffrage Bazaar herself. Our next First Lady during this time that we're going to talk about is Helen Herron Taft, or Nellie Taft as she was known. Very ambitious woman, really fun, interesting woman to talk about. She had two passions in her life, and that was music and politics. And she actually thrived on politics. And many believed that she wanted the presidency more than her husband, William Howard Taft. She actually threw herself deeply into the campaign when he ran for president. She helped him write speeches, and she did all she could behind the scenes, but she could not be seen. So she spent a lot of time behind closed doors and curtains, listening to his speeches that he gave, listening for what the audience would say, listening for how his words affected the audience. And then she would give him critiques and help him along. So she was really felt that the presidency was a triumphal thing for both her and Howard and her husband, Will. But unfortunately, only a few months into her triumphant entry into the White House, she suffered a severe stroke, and it affected her left side, and it also affected her speech. So her daughter, Helen, this is a picture of her daughter, Helen, who was named Helen too, in 1909. Helen came back, was a student at Bryn Mawr College, and she stopped her studies there, came back to the White House, moved in, and she helped her mother regain her body movement and speech again. And she also served as a hostess for many White House functions and while her mother recuperated and became able to do it again. After her mother's recovery, she resumed her studies at Bryn Mawr and graduated in 1915 with a bachelor's degree in history. I'm going to talk a little bit about Helen Taft Manning, because as the daughter of a First Lady, she was often, I often think that she was given the opportunities that Nellie didn't have, and she did all these amazing things. She became the dean of her alma mater, Bryn Mawr, in 1917. And soon after she became dean, she also became part of the Women's Land Army, and she became a farmerette in Westchester, Pennsylvania. The Women's Land Army was made up of groups of women throughout the country who took over the farming that was happening across the country, that the shortage of farmers due to the World War I cause. And many suffragists, including Helen, who was a suffragist, became part of the cause. The following summer, she even traveled throughout the country attending women's war conferences, giving a lecture series called the Farmeretting. And like I said, she also was a very staunch believer in the suffrage movement. So Nellie, this is where Nellie kind of didn't agree totally with her daughter Helen. Nellie actually was, even though she was incredibly close to Helen, she was very proud of her. She was not really for full suffrage. She wanted partial suffrage. She really, truly believed that women and men should be educated before they could vote. And she felt that that was really the way to go for suffrage was for women to only have partial in the area of education as any American womanhood, true womanhood would. Our next First Lady that we're going to talk about is Ellen Axon Wilson. Ellen was the first wife of Woodrow Wilson. They were married for a little over 30 years, and she was a very accomplished and talented artist in and of her, in her own way. She was the oldest of 4 children, and after her parents' deaths, she and Woodrow went on to raise her 3 other siblings. She was quite a bit older than her other siblings. During she and Woodrow's engagement, Woodrow, while he was continuing on with his studies, she went as a solo woman and went on her own on a train, unchaperoned, to New York, where she was an art student at and studied art at the Art Students League. But she left her art behind to become, as in true womanhood, American womanhood fashion, to become the wife and mother, and chose to marry over her art. And they raised 3 daughters. By the time that Woodrow's running for the presidency in 1912, there's this amazing article that's written here called Mrs. Woodrow Wilson, one of the most accomplished women in public eye. I'd like to call your attention to the very last sentence there. It's all this glowing thing about how accomplished she is and all the wonderful things she can do in the realm of womanhood. But it says, Mrs. Wilson is regarded as a notable example of the power of woman without the ballot. In this remarkable article that I found in the Los Angeles Times in July 8th, again during the campaign, this is a woman journalist. Her name is Margaret de Peister, and I apologize if I've mispronounced her name. She does an actual interview with Ellen Wilson. My goodness, here is a woman interviewing another woman in 1912. This is very exciting that this is happening. You have to believe that this is really huge. And I want to call your attention here to the article at the very end. It's this lovely article there. She's asking her many questions. But if you look right down there, you see that the thing that says, "And suffrage?" I inquired. Mrs. Wilson smiled, and with a plump white hand smoothed the soft green draperies of her gown. "There are all shades of suffrage opinion in the family," she replied. "When I think of the value as a weapon it might have for the large number of women who earn their own living, I'm inclined to favor it. When I consider its possible effect upon the larger interests of society as a whole, I am not so sure. One of my daughters is a suffragist. Which one, I won't tell you. She might not like it." And then it goes on to explain that she remains determined not to let you know who the suffragist is in the family. But the interviewer believes that it is her daughter, Eleanor. Well, actually, it was all 3 of Ellen's daughters, Jessie, Margaret, and Eleanor here. And especially by this point in 1912, I know for certain that it probably wasn't Eleanor that was the suffragist. It probably, and I know for certain, was Jessie. Jessie had worked in a settlement home in Philadelphia for 3 years after graduating college, and she was incredibly active as a suffragist, as a philanthropist. She worked for a lot of causes to help the downtrodden. And, excuse me. And after the passage of the 19th Amendment, she actually became very active in the National League of Women's Voters. I'd like to also point out these other 2 women, remarkable daughters of Ellen and Woodrow Wilson. Margaret Wilson, there next to Jessie, she was a vocalist. She studied voice and was a very serious vocalist and wanted to make her career that way. She was very career-driven. I don't think she ever even considered getting married. The most interesting thing about Margaret that I wanted to make sure to point out was that during World War I, she toured Europe entertaining the American troops. And when I say that she entertained the American troops, this wasn't like the USO with Bob Hope and the entertainment for the troops. No, Margaret went down into the trenches and she would sing to the men down in the trenches. She did this so often, and she actually ruined her singing voice. She wasn't able ever to sing again. Quite a remarkable lady. And Eleanor, that you see down there, she was an artist like her mother, and she wrote several books about her family, and that's why I know that she and her sisters were suffragists. We know Ellen dies while she's in office in 1914, leaving a very bereft husband, Woodrow Wilson. He was just lost without her. Jessie and Eleanor by this point had married. They were and leading their own lives. Margaret was in New York. And so Woodrow was really, really lost during this time. He was introduced to Edith Bowling Galt at the time. She was a wealthy widow there in Washington, D.C. She loved to tool around in her automobile, and she was quite, she loved to be very social. She was leading a very happy, contented life when she was introduced to Woodrow Wilson through his physician, Dr. Grayson. Dr. Grayson was actually dating one of Edith's good friends, and Dr. Grayson felt that he thought that Woodrow might hit it off with Edith. Well, did he ever? He fell madly in love with her, and they were married in December of 1915. They were inseparable. They were just very, very happy. She was madly in love with him, and he with her. But as you can see, she was a Southern lady. She was a very traditional, proper lady. She felt that speaking in public was improper. She would refuse to answer, wouldn't talk to the press whenever they asked her questions. And she really found the methods of the more militant suffragists as insulting, unfeminine, and unpatriotic. Her main thing was that suffragists were not giving her husband respect. That really bothered her because she adored him. She just thought he was the best. So she did not want him to be insulted by these unsightly things that the militants were doing, such as Alice Paul, the National Women's Party. But did it mean that she was really against suffrage? Well, if you look at this quote from her own memoir that she wrote, you see where she says here that the suffragists displayed a banner so outrageous that the police arrested them. Imagine our surprise when Dudley Field Malone, whom my husband had appointed collector of the Port of New York, defended these women. Nevertheless, they were sentenced to 60 days in the workhouse. I was blazing with anger at Malone's conduct, and my husband was deeply hurt. He suggested pardoning the women, though not because Mr. Malone had defended them. He said they must not be made martyrs. Mr. Tumulty, who was actually Woodrow Wilson's secretary, opposed the pardon. But the next day, after a round of golf with Dr. Grayson and me, the president signed the paper. So she's kind of giving herself just a little bit of credit there, isn't she? If you kind of read there, that she actually kind of helped nudge him to pardon the suffragists who were jailed. While Miss Edith Wilson was very much against public speaking, during the war effort, she began to change a little bit, and she started to write these letters that were public letters with other women. And this one says, Mrs. Woodrow Wilson urges Allied mothers to uphold morale of containment. I'm sorry. I'm getting a little dry-mouthed here. if you see there at the very bottom that it says it's this very very patriotic, women and mothers must rise to support the troops. It says faithfully yours, Edith Bowling Wilson and Anna Howard Shaw, chairman of the Women's Committee of the National Council of Defense. So who is Anna Howard Shaw? Well, she, as this picture of her says below, she was a reverend, one of the first women ministers. She was also president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She was the president from 1904 to 1915, when Carrie Chapman took over the presidency. So as you can see, Edith has no problem putting her name with a suffragist. Of course, it is for the cause of the world of the troops. Also, there was an article that was, I could not actually find this, but I read wherein Woodrow and Edith were taking a tour of the country during that 1919. And she mentioned, it was mentioned in September of 1919 in a newspaper that as she was speaking with friends, Mrs. Wilson mentioned that Minnesota was the 14th state to grant women the vote. She declared, "It's a wonderful thing to have something to say about the laws of the land we live in." And also then, as you can see, she was the first lady to vote. The New York Times reported on October 31st, 1920, that Mrs. Wilson was the first of the great army of women enfranchised by the 19th Amendment to vote in the 1920 election. Of course, the first lady to be able to actually vote for her husband and campaign for him was Florence King Harding. And Florence, is, she reminds me a lot of Nellie Taft. Very ambitious, loves music and politics. And she's incredibly politically savvy, just like Nellie Taft. However, it's now 1920, and she can openly declare the support of her husband. And she can also state that she too is a suffragist. She's able to stand with him and be an active part of his campaign. Here's, in this article, you see that it says July, this is during the campaign, that look at these headlines. Harding's running mate is help and not clinging vine. Look how much this has changed. It's amazing that there's a marked change for a politician's wife to be called a running mate. Before, she was just his wife. This is huge. This is really exciting. And Florence Harding eats it up. She considers the 1920 campaign a highlight of her entire life. I want to call your attention to these last two paragraphs in this article, where it's showing you this new kind of woman. 1 minute she was out on the sidewalk directing some workmen who were shoveling gravel. The next she was at the kitchen door seeing if Inez, the cook, was adequately supplied with the materials of her art. I also want to talk about two other first ladies who came after the suffrage movement after the women's suffrage movement had passed. And you have to talk about these two women because they were so involved with women and with women's and supportive of women's issues. First one I'm going to talk about is Lou Hoover, who was was first lady during 1929 to 1933. She's a remarkably amazing woman who majored in geology at Stanford University. She was very committed to women having opportunities to be physically active, not only for physical health, but for mental health. She really understood that. She was president of the Girl Scouts and founder of the Women's Division of the National Amateur Athletic Foundation, which is a precursor to what is now became the YMCA, the YWCAs, where you have your athletic facilities to enjoy. She was also an incredible advocate for girls to receive an education and excel at whatever they wanted to strive to do. She was indifferent to women's suffrage, however. She once said that she never thought women were downtrodden by the men before they had the right to vote. So what was Lou Hoover doing during the suffrage, this huge the thing that was really going on during suffrage? Well, you see here in 1920 that she's very, very active after the war, after World War I. She's very concerned about the teachers and what's happening to the teachers after World War I. There's a shortage of teachers. And this part of the article that you see here is her actual, this is the things that she had to say. And one of the things that she talks about is that she expects I want to put, where is it here? I don't have it on my notes. In the second paragraph, or the third paragraph down, she asks the question, are our children trudging innocently to school going to find teachers capable of perpetuating the high idealism born of the war? Or are we going to expect the impossible from teachers who get less salary than stenographers? So you can see she's very, very concerned about women in education. She says, we draft the little children into schools like soldiers, but we neglect to provide them with efficient officers. Our girls must feel that they have the stamp of approval of the nation upon their work before they can be expected to sacrifice themselves into it. And finally, we're going to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt, because you have to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt when you talk about women's rights. She's an amazing champion of women's rights, civil rights, human rights, and just all kinds of discrimination for all of human kind. However, she was not a suffragist during the suffrage movement. In 1911, when FDR announced his support of the suffrage movement, Eleanor wrote, I was somewhat shocked, as I had never given the question serious thought. I took it for granted that men were superior creatures and still knew more about politics than women. I realized if my husband was a suffragist, then I probably must be too. In 1924, she was at a National League of Women's Voters Convention in Buffalo. And a reporter asked her this very question, how do men treat you in politics? And she replies, well, I am the last person in the world who should talk about that, because I haven't anything to say except favorable things. Always the politician. This very last bit of this article, it's always the last bit that I always really enjoy. They ask, if you read there, that as the Democratic nominee for vice president in 1920, Mrs. Roosevelt was a popular woman in the social and political life in Washington. She says that during the time of the suffrage fight, during the suffrage fight was made, she was home raising 6 babies. That was an accomplishment in itself, don't you think? She inquired. Yes, it was. So in conclusion, again, the role of the First Lady is the official hostess of the nation. She's supportive of her husband and his presidency. She has influence through her political partnership with him. And she is free to create this volunteer position any way she sees fit. I would like to also point out that this supportive role constrains the actions and speech of women who occupy the role. And in some respects, it hindered women's progress. None of these first ladies, very few of them that I spoke about in this thing, could completely understand the barriers that prevented non-white Americans from participating fully in American society. But they changed and grew as individuals throughout their life. And actually their term as First Lady, it's only a very short span of their life. Since 1920, there have been many needed changes for women's rights, and it is still happening to this very day. And so remember that change happens and nothing stands still. Change just sometimes happens faster than we're comfortable with. And that's certainly true today, isn't it, with the pandemic? And in times such as now, we want to make sure, though, that we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote and remind all Americans to don't forget to vote in December. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. If you have a minute,
really fast.
We do have a little bit of time. If you're willing
Good, yes.
to stop and take a drink. I have a few questions that came
Yes, thank you.
And many more. And as we don't get to them all today, what we'll do is try to use the questions that you all have, which are very wonderful, on our social media pages, because I think there's some of these that are really interesting. Someone mentions, and we've talked about this, I'm pulling some things from the chat, and there are some questions. Back to Ida McKinley, Ida Saxton.
Yes.
Betsy Mix-Cowles was really strong suffragist and had been Ida's teacher. Do you think Ida?
Yes. Good job. Yes.
Do you think she was influential on Ida?
I do. I really think that she was influential with Ida for sure. We actually know of a letter that her father wrote to Betsy McCowell, stating that he wanted his daughters to, know how business worked. So he actually sought Betsy Cowell out to have Ida go to school there, and her sister Mary. They both went to school with Betsy. He was very much believed in this himself. He was fortunate to have the father that she did.
How do you think the opinions of the First Ladies affect the public suffrage debate?
I'm sorry?
How do you think the opinions of First Ladies impacted the public suffrage debate?
Well, as I said, the fact that they remain so guarded in what they say is it didn't help the suffrage debate very much. And it's because of the role that they have to play as a politician's wife. They can't say yes, they can't come out until Florence. They couldn't come out and say, yes, I'm for suffrage, or no, I'm not for suffrage. It was political suicide for their husband if they did so. And no wife would want to do that to her husband. So they really couldn't speak out, which is unfortunate.
One of the questions and things that we've talked about is many of these women were in very powerful positions too. So they really didn't need suffrage. They already had that power as well, which I think is kind of interesting in thinking about their reactions and feelings about suffrage. There's another question here, really good one. In their advocacy, did any of the pro-suffrage First Ladies interact with or personally ally themselves with Black women activists?
Very excellent question. Not to my knowledge, okay. No. I would love to find that, but I have not been able to find it, no.
There's some more specific questions here. Did Eleanor Roosevelt opt out of voting in the first post-19th Amendment election? Did she vote?
Yes, she did.
Okay.
She voted for James Cox. her husband in 1920, he was actually the Democrat. He was running as the vice president on the ticket with James Cox. This is even before he was stricken with polio. So yes, she voted.
How did Edith know Helen Hamilton Gardner?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I don't think she did. I really don't know. I didn't run across that.
So that is all of the questions we have in the chat. Someone else is saying, you know, the suffrage movement was such a long, hard struggle. You
Yes.
highlighted specific women today, but do we know the suffrage position of all of the 18 first ladies that were kind of
in because of time constraints, I actually took out a lot of first ladies. Again, none of them could really say that they that they were a suffragist. I just never saw anything like that where a first lady came out and said, yes, I'm a suffragist. Or that I'm for women's suffrage. As you saw with the piece that Ellen Wilson in that, she would say, well, I see that it could be good, but I also worry that it's got a problem. And I think that a lot of first ladies remain, again, it's because of who they're married to. They're married to politicians, and they just can't say because of what their husband is doing.
Have you encountered more contemporary first ladies who have really been influenced by the suffrage movement? We've seen Marissa Melania has made a video and done an art contest related to the commemoration of the 19th Amendment. Hillary Clinton and her campaign wore white in honor of the suffragists. Are there other first ladies who have been influenced by suffrage that are more contemporary?
Right off the bat, I think of Lady Bird Johnson and Rosalind Carter, Betty Ford, and you can see elements of Betty Ford, Rosalind Carter, and even Pat Nixon, who spoke out and said that they were pro-ERA. So you see these elements of, it's just within our country, we are so, it's a matter of getting used to women being able to say, hey, I support this. It's any woman, any first lady who comes out and is radical. I'm going to use Eleanor Roosevelt or Hillary Clinton. Radical in that I mean that they step outside our comfort zone of what a first lady should be able to do. Is oftentimes just, it's so hard, not only for them personally, but for the marriage and for their husband's presidency. So first ladies are extremely careful about what they say.
Well, it looks like we've answered most all of the questions. We'll look through the chat and information to see if there's anything else. And again, if you have questions, please reach out to us. We love doing the research and pushing it out on social media. And again, because of the pandemic, our celebration of the suffrage centennial will go far into 2021. So this is not a topic that we will stop discussing or thinking about anytime soon. So we want to thank Michelle for a wonderful talk today, and hope that you join us for some of our upcoming events. Connect with us on social media or through our website at firstladies.org, and we will catch you all later. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you.